my whole journey in watch repair and in cycling happened at the same time. I found myself in that situation through school. Came out at the age of 14 to do a summer job, which extended itself into, that was me, into the whole working environment. But the watchmaking thing was an apprenticeship, and I'm going to stray a little bit here because an apprenticeship, as it's known in the plumbing trade, electrical trade, whatever it may be, could be 4 years. But an apprenticeship in watchmaking is a lifetime. It's something of committal. It's the same with riding a bicycle. In effect, there's a close relationship between bicycles and watches. They're fundamentally the same sort of systematic gears and wheels. And maybe the unification like that is what drew me towards the bike and watches. But I mean, I'm very thankful that way back then in 1972, when I put my hand up in that classroom and found myself taking that sort of first steps into the working environment, that I did make that decision. It's almost like subconsciously something was directing me that way. And in some ways that's how my whole life has been. I've never really worried about too much. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to be married for the past 40 years. I've got 4 children who I'm hugely proud of, all done very well in their own field, and almost without any sort of activity from myself other than the security and comfort and everything else that you find yourself wanting to give children. So everything has been in some ways mapped out, but it's like I said to you earlier, you have to initiate a lot of things. I've been through a lot of trials and tribulations through the last 52 years. I decided, just quite like without any real deep thought, January this year, that I was going to retire. So it was time for, if you like, my time. But in saying that, I always knew it wasn't retirement the way people look at retirement. I mean, I'm much too young. I'm 66 years of age, but I mean, inside me, I'm 14. I'm still that person. I'm still as enthusiastic about the bike. I'm still as enthusiastic about the watches. I'm still as enthusiastic about life in general. I mean, there's nothing that would have made me feel like, what am I going to do with my time? I always knew that I had like lots to occupy myself. And so somewhere subconsciously, I knew I would do something. But that something had to be something that was a passion. Got myself some tools, started to play about, started to take watches apart and investigate them, and like I really loved it. And it was just like a hobby built on top of somewhere where I didn't know where I was at that time, and started to do some little Instagram posts, and I've got quite a moderate sort of following of about 600 like people that follow me, and a lot of interest came that way. People started to ask me, like, can you do this, can you do that? And I mean, I don't think there was one thing that I wasn't able to do for anyone that asked me. And the watches that I worked at way back then were fresh, they were new. They were 5 years old, coming in for their first service or whatever it may be. But now those watches that people still aspire to and love, you know, especially the vintage watches, they take a lot of time and consideration because they're now like 60 years old. So they've been like a beating heart. If they've been looked after, they've been going for that length of time. And like everything that's mechanical, it has its sort of stresses and strains. So if you're fortunate enough to get something like that to work on, first of all, it's a pleasure to do. It's nice for someone to give you something like that to work on, but it requires a lot of commitment, a lot of time, sometimes getting up and walking away and going back to. Watchmaking is not something that you sit down, you tear it apart, you build it back together in 5 minutes. It's a long process. It's a process of dedication. It doesn't matter what it is in life, whether it's the bicycle, whether it's the watches or whatever it may be. I sometimes look to myself almost a bit OCD. But I don't like to think I'm pulled into traits like that, but I do think I am very much meticulous in what I do. I like to do a thing right. And with watches, you don't get the chance to do something that's not right. Yeah, you sort of like sometimes see a vintage watch that someone else has worked on, and maybe they haven't been as kind to it as what they should have been. And I suppose that's one of the things that you see in watchmaking. It's like anybody in any sort of professional industry. You get people that are exquisite in what they do, and you get other people that are maybe not just so. But whatever you take on, it's a challenge. And like I say, certainly in the period of time that I've been doing this, there's nothing that I haven't been able to do for people. It may have taken a little bit extra time to do, but I always seem to get there. I mean, I fell upon the bicycle through the guy who was the senior watchmaker at that time. He was a fantastic watchmaker and a fantastic cyclist. He rode for Phoenix Cycling Club, and without him saying anything to me, that was the direction that my eyes took, and seeing his bike sitting in the workshop. And in effect, there's a close relationship between bicycles and watches. They're fundamentally the same sort of systematic gears and wheels. And maybe the unification like that is what drew me towards the bike and watches. But the other thing is I find with riding a bicycle, it's spiritual. To ride a bicycle at the level I've ridden at, I mean, I'm going to tell you now, I've done over 1 million miles on a bike. There's very, very few people in this country or even mainland Britain that have covered that sort of distance. So that in itself takes, it means riding your bike every day. How often do you need to ride your bike if you're going to race as an amateur? 365 days a year. Because if you're doing 364, you're already at a disadvantage. And I mean, that's the ethos that I came up through. It's not like the sport that it is now that has all those diversities to it. It was a hard industry to come into. It was like you had to be accepted into it, and there was no room for anybody unless you were elitist, unless you were at the top of your field. You weren't going to succeed, even at amateur level. It exposes you. There's not an amateur cyclist out there of any worth or professional, and that's for that same reason that hasn't been to that place that's horrible. It's a sport of suffering, but it's also a sport that gives you back a lot. I mean, I was riding my bike for 30 years before I won my first Ulster medal. And in the course of 7 days, I won another Ulster medal and I won an Irish championship. So if that's any indication as to perseverance, commitment and dedication, then sometimes that's what it takes. It's like what people say, if it's worth working towards, then it's going to take a lot of time and effort. And I'm glad I stuck at riding my bicycle. It's been testament to how I am today. I'm 66 years of age, and like I say, I feel still like that youngster that started out all those years ago. Yeah, there's no doubt in what's happening here at Nomadic. It's given people a precision watch movement inside a fantastic stainless steel case and multiple choice of bracelet and strap at a price that's absolutely, in my estimation, fantastic value. So yeah, I'm just glad to be part of it. I'm just glad to be, still able to ride my bike, still able to have the dexterity and everything that it takes to pull all those tiny parts apart and rebuild them again. So in some ways, to finish off, I'm rebuilding my life the way I sometimes rebuild I haven't come into retirement, like I said, in the way you would normally think that, you've maybe reached a milestone, that's it all over. I'm glad I still have that youth within me that, I see with this opportunity that Peter's given me that it's almost like starting out on a new journey. And it's what I'm very much looking forward to.